Today is December 5th, 2020, and November 2020 just ended 5 days ago. Now we're in the 5th day of December, and December is the final month of 2020, meaning the end of this year, the end of 2020 is almost here, and I'm honestly very happy about that because this year has not at all been a good year. So I'm glad that we're in the final chapter of this year. We're in the final stretch of this year, then we get to 2021, and we can finally be done with 2020. I'm hoping that 2021 can be a year of recovery because 2020 has been very devastating for many people, economically speaking, in terms of the pandemic, in terms of racial relations, in terms of police brutality, all sorts of things. This year has been terrible for most people, but I wanted to talk about November 2020 in this video. I mentioned a few days ago how I would make a recap over November of 2020. I would make a video talking about what all happened in November of 2020, and I plan on having this as a monthly series, meaning that at the beginning of every month, I'm going to talk about what all happened in the previous month. Since November of this year just ended a few days ago, November 2020 just ended, I decided that I would make a video talking about what all happened in those 30 days in November of this year. So, in the first few days, November 1 and November 2, this was right before the 2020 election started. The 2020 election this year was on November 3rd, 2020. That was the official election day, November 3rd. But not all the results came in on election day, which we're going to get to in a second. But on November 1st and November 2nd, these were the last couple days before the 2020 election kicked off. And on these 2 days, basically the main thing that happened was both major presidential candidates, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, did last-minute campaigning. I believe Donald Trump held several rallies. Joe Biden didn't really hold any big rallies because he didn't want COVID-19 to spread at his rallies, but what he did do instead was he did some smaller rallies, and I believe sometime before November 3rd, I don't know if it was actually November or not, but he also did some online rallies, some internet rallies. But the main thing that happened in the first couple days of November was one, major candidates in the presidential election and also to a certain extent in the Senate elections and House elections. These candidates campaigned, did last minute campaigning for their upcoming elections. And besides that, this was also when COVID-19 started to get really bad in this country, and I guess across the world, but especially in the United States. At the end of October, beginning of November, that is actually when we started crossing the 100,000 cases per day mark. I believe October 30th, or I don't remember the exact date, but it was around late October, early November, so right around when this month began actually. That is when we started seeing more than 100,000 COVID cases every single day. And throughout this entire month, with almost no exceptions, if any, I don't know the exact numbers, but almost every single day this month we've had over 100,000 cases per day, 100,000 COVID cases, so that's what happened in the first couple days of November. Then November 3rd, that was election day. On this day, not all the mail-in ballots were counted. Most of the votes that were counted were in-person ballots, and for whatever reason, it might be because Trump told his voters not to vote by mail but to vote in person instead, but for whatever reason, most of Trump supporters voted in person, but a lot of Biden supporters voted by mail. So before all the mail-in ballots were counted on election night, because on election night some states didn't count the mail-in ballots yet. On election night, it looked like Trump was up by quite a lot because they only counted the in-person ballots, and that heavily favored Trump. So in all the Rust Belt states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota, those states all showed Trump up ahead by over 10 percentage points over Biden, and it looked like Trump had a good chance of winning on election night. But what actually happened is, in the following days, more and more of the mail-in ballots started getting counted. Minnesota went for Biden eventually. Then the next day, on November 4th, Wisconsin and Michigan went for Biden, but it took a few more days for the states of Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania to be decided for Joe Biden. November 5th, the counting was still going. They hadn't finished on November 5th. On November 5th and 6th, there were no states called. Throughout those days, Georgia was still toss-up, Arizona was still toss-up, Nevada was still toss-up, Pennsylvania and Alaska had also not been decided yet, but on November 7th, after 4 days of this election cycle, of this whole election going on, it was finally declared that Joe Biden had won the presidential election. On November 7th of this year, of this month, that past month actually, that is the day that it was decided that Joe Biden won the 2020 presidential election. And it was decided by all the major news networks because of the fact that Joe Biden won the state of Pennsylvania. It was declared on November 7th that he would win the state of Pennsylvania. And because of that, that gave him 20 electoral votes. And depending on which news network you were paying attention to more, Joe Biden either had 273 electoral votes or 284 electoral votes as a result. The reason why there was that discrepancy was because some news networks such as Associated Press and Fox projected Biden to win Arizona early on, but CNN, MSNBC, and some other news networks decided that it was too early to call, and they didn't call Arizona for Biden until days after. I believe CNN and MSNBC both called Arizona after they called Pennsylvania. So by the time Joe Biden won that state, according to those news networks, it didn't matter anyway because Joe Biden had already crossed the 270 electoral vote threshold. Following November 7th, following the declaration that Joe Biden had won, a lot of Trump supporters thought that there was voter fraud. They claimed to have found a lot of evidence saying that the election was rigged in favor of Biden, that Trump was the rightful winner. Trump himself even filed many lawsuits. I believe the number was over 30 lawsuits in a variety of different states claiming that there was fraud taking place and that it should be investigated. So this was in the following couple weeks. So that is what has been happening for a large part of this month, actually. Trump and his supporters have been filing lawsuits because they believe the election was rigged in favor of Joe Biden, but almost all of these lawsuits have been flat out rejected because most of the evidence that Trump and his legal team put up in order to claim that there was fraud in this election, they turned out to be false. It turned out to be not real because there wasn't actually any evidence of voter fraud, at least not at the level, not to the extent that Trump and his team was claiming that there was. So it is basically guaranteed at this point that Joe Biden will become the 46th president of the United States. The only way he wouldn't become the 46th president is if there is enough faithless electors in the electoral college to where they can swing it in favor of Trump. But the thing is, Joe Biden won this election pretty handily. He got 306 electoral votes. You would need over 30 faithless electors, which is just not at all realistic. So Joe Biden will be the 46th president of the United States. Besides the presidential election, that was by far the biggest, most important event that took place in this month, at least in the United States. This is a more US centric channel, so I tend to focus more on events in the United States. Besides that, though, COVID got really bad in this country. I've made many videos on this channel, especially after the 2020 election cleared up. I've made many videos talking about this. COVID got really bad in the United States. We, for the first time, broke the 100,000 cases per day mark at the start of this month, but in the middle of this month, sometime in middle of November, we broke the 200,000 cases per day mark. I don't remember the exact date, but it was in the third week of November, I believe. If not third, then it was the fourth week. We hit 200,000 cases in a single day, and in the month of November, there were more COVID cases in the country than any other month throughout this entire year. In fact, there were more COVID cases in the United States in November than there was in the entire first half of 2020. November itself had over 4 million new COVID cases in the United States, when the first half of 2020 only had around 3.5 million in total. So COVID was really bad for the United States this month, and the daily death count started to really get out of hand this month also. We even passed the levels that we saw in the spring when the death count was really bad, especially in relation to the case count, but now it's seeming to get even worse and worse, and in the next few weeks it's expected to get to as high as around 300,000 cases per day. This isn't in November, but yesterday, December 4th, we hit 240,000 cases per day in a single day approximately, so that is not good news. But what is good news is that it was announced last month in November that two vaccines, both Pfizer and Moderna, in their phase 3 trials showed to have an over 90% effectiveness rate, meaning that if you take either one of those vaccines, there's a higher than 90% chance that you're actually immune from the virus. And it was announced at the end of last month, in the last week of November, that people would start having access to these vaccines. A limited amount of people would start having access to these vaccines as early as December of this year, which is the current month. So, right around now, maybe in a few weeks from now, maybe by the end of this month, a limited amount of people will start having access to these vaccines. Now, most people won't have access for a few more months. Most of the people that will have access to these vaccines are healthcare workers or just people who are likely to get the virus in the first place because of the fact that they work with many potential COVID 19 patients. So, most of us aren't going to get the vaccine until sometime in 2021, probably in the spring or summer of 2021. But some people will start getting this vaccine in the upcoming weeks. So, December this month, January of next year. But it was announced last month that the vaccine was almost here, and that in just a few more months, we can all start taking this vaccine. There were also some pretty grim projections made for this virus last month. It was projected sometime in the past couple of weeks that by February of next year, February of 2021, the United States will have around 450,000 deaths, COVID 19 deaths in total, or at least above 400,000 deaths in total. But it was also projected that millions of people could have access to the vaccine by February of 2021, so you have some good news mixed in with some bad news there. But the daily case count and death count is expected to get even higher than it currently is in the upcoming weeks. We can see that right now. We're having an even bigger spike now than we did a few weeks ago. In the spike we had this month, or the past month, I guess at this point, on average we were seeing cases around 150,000 cases per day. But at its peak on November 20th, that's when we broke the 200,000 cases per day mark for the first time throughout this entire pandemic. On November 20th, which just happened to be Joe Biden's birthday, we broke the 200,000 cases per day mark when we had, on November 20th of last month, we had 204,166 positive COVID 19 tests, all on that one day, all on November 20th. So, this virus has really been screwing over the United States in the past month, and as a result, because of how bad the virus has spread in the past few months, many local leaders, many leaders at the state level or at the city level, they have been implementing new lockdown measures, new social distancing measures, or new mask mandates in order to try to stop the spread of this virus, which I can see where they're coming from because of the fact that in the past few weeks, this virus has gotten completely out of control. It is worse now than it was in the summer, it's worse now than it was in the spring, it's worse now than it probably will ever be. I think this will be the last major wave because after this major wave gets done with, we will start seeing the vaccine be distributed to people. So I'm hoping that after all this wave is over, we won't see any more major waves like we're seeing right now. Because this is not at all good. We're seeing consistently over 150,000 cases per day, and at this point in the first few days of December, we've seen over 200,000 cases per day now. So it's worse now than it has ever been before. So the major events that happened in the month of November 2020 was the 2020 presidential election, Joe Biden winning, and COVID 19 getting completely out of control. But besides the presidential election, the Republicans are likely going to hold on to the Senate. Although the Republicans are currently at 50 seats, Democrats also have a chance to get to 50 seats. What happened in the Georgia Senate elections was neither of the Senate elections are finished. They both have to go to runoff elections, which are taking place in a month from now, January 5th, 2021. Because in neither of these Senate elections did any candidate get more than 50% of the votes, and Georgia law states that if no candidate gets 50% of the votes, they have to go to runoff elections. In the small chance that Democrats win both of those Senate seats, they would still technically have a majority in the Senate because of the fact that Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, is a Democrat because Joe Biden won, or she will be the Vice President, I should say. And because the Vice President cast the tiebreaker vote, the Democrats will essentially have control over the Senate if they manage to win both of the Senate races in Georgia. Now, for the House elections, Democrats won the House elections, but here's the thing. They lost many seats that they previously had, meaning that the Republicans gained several new seats that they previously did not have. So the Democrats still have a majority in the House, but their majority is slimmer than before. Now, because Joe Biden won the presidential election, he was the winner of the 2020 presidential election, he has started choosing his cabinet picks. He has started nominating people that will be in his cabinet. So I don't remember the exact positions he's nominated yet, but most of the people I have not heard of before. The other thing is that for a lot of Joe Biden's cabinet picks, the Senate will have to approve of them, and if the Senate is Republican, then Joe Biden will have a harder time getting his cabinet picks approved. Now, I just remembered this event that happened in November of 2020, but it was discovered that minks in Denmark, in the country of Denmark, were actually getting infected with the COVID 19 virus because they got it from humans. It actually turns out that they discovered that in one of these minks that were on this mink farm, they discovered that there was a mutation that took place in the mink. After a human passed the virus to the virus mutated in the mink, and there was the chance that it could pass back to the humans because the thing about COVID 19 is that with minks, you can transmit it to the mink, but the mink can actually transmit it back to humans. So, because of the worries of the mutation spreading around the world and making a potential vaccine a lot less useful, the potential vaccines that are coming up, they decided in Denmark that they would kill 17 million mink approximately across all those mink farms in order to reduce the risk of a vaccine being ineffective because of a mutation that could take place in these minks. The last major event that took place in November of 2020 that I can think of right now is the major scientist from Iran being assassinated. Sometime in the last week of November, a major scientist from Iran was assassinated. At the moment, it's not known who did the killing, but if there's any other major events that I've missed, let me know and I'll make another video.